Table for One, episode 13. This week we're looking at digital board games and the question of analog versus digital and the benefits of both. Hey everybody, welcome back to Table for One. This is episode 13. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about some digital games and their analog counterparts and when it makes sense for either of those, as well as some of our favorites from this last year. As usual, this is Anthony, and we have with us Jason this week as well.
Yo, peoples, what's up?
All right, guys. So last week we did our big gift guide. We talked about some of our favorite solo games, not necessarily of this year, but some of the ones that a little under the radar or, maybe fit well for the multiplayer / solo crossover. This week we wanted to talk about the digital component, and we are just going to focus on, in terms of the games we talk about, 2016. But even more than that, wanted to talk about kind of the difference between the analog and the digital versions of games and when it makes sense to have one or the other.
Or both.
Yeah, or both. Yeah. There are several games in which I'm perfectly happy to have both. But I know this comes up a lot. I know this came up a lot on BGA. I know it comes up a lot on Board Game Geek. Anytime a new popular, or even an old popular game hits the iPad, people are... The big question is, does it have a place? Would this replace the board game version? And I think we both have kind of unique thoughts on that. So we're going to dive into that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess before we do, I just wanted to take a step back and look at the year 2016 in apps. I think 2015 was okay, not great. This year, we got a bunch of stuff. Just to run through the list really fast, we got Police Precinct, Suro, Sushi Go, Cthulhu Realms, Twilight Struggle, Lanterns, Forbidden Desert, Crossmaster Arena, Baseball Highlights, Glass Road, Patchwork, Puzzle Strike, Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small, 1775 Rebellion, McKee, Smash Up, and Colt Express just came out this month. We're not even going to talk about any of those games. but if you kind of heard something in there, it's like, oh, there's an app for that. Just go into your Google Play or iOS and take a look. That's a good game library. Just straight up look at your shelves, like, okay, there's a lot to do there, and that's just this year.
Yeah, it's nuts. Like you said, it really took off this year, and some of these games even go beyond just app. You have like Twilight Struggle, 1775 Rebellion, Heroes of Normandy is another one that released both as apps, but you can get the computer version, the PC Mac version. It's even bigger, and you get the full screen and everything. So digital board games definitely went big this year, and that's even with like the half a dozen games at Asmodee delayed into next year that are still not out. So
you got Mysterium, Potion Explosion. VOD is set to release through the ages. There's just a lot. And then the updates to the app. So Ticket to Ride Pennsylvania came out. Ascension Dreamscape came out. Even Galaxy Trucker, a game which I detest with every fiber of my being, had a big update, and just so much good stuff out there.
Yeah, that Galaxy Trucker app is kind of funny. I don't hate it, and I do not like the game. So I guess we could get into that later. Different implementations, but that's an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. So we figured we'd pick out a couple just to elaborate a little bit. The two that I think that Anthony and I, we've agreed we've played the most, and then we can kind of dive into our discussion question.
Yeah, I think so. And I have probably 80% of these on my iPad, but there are two, maybe three or four that kind of hit my screen more often than anything else. But as Jason said, we're just going to talk about a couple. I guess I'll kick things off with the one that I've played by far the most this year, if only because I became addicted to it in that way that you become addicted to a lot of really good mobile games. It's quick, it's a puzzle, and you lose pretty much every time you play, so you keep playing. And that's the game. This is the card game nominated for the Spiel des Jahres a couple years ago. If you've seen it, you know it. It's just these weirdly inappropriately dark cards with this skull background that you are placing either up to 100 or down to 1. You have 4 stacks and one of each card. Typically, you'd play it at a table with multiple people. It's cooperative, and you're just trying to get as few cards left in the deck as possible. The solo version is exactly the same, except you do it by yourself. But the app comes with the expansion, which is the On Fire expansion, and I think they finally released that in hard version. But that basically just makes certain cards on fire. You have to play them when they come into your hand. You have to play them by the next turn, otherwise you lose. So it adds a little bit of stress and pressure to the game. You got the high score modes. You can set different levels. There's achievements that go with it. So all the cool stuff you'd expect to get in a digital anything, with the addictiveness of the game. And I think the reason I played it so much this year is that it takes all of 5 to 10 minutes to play. It works really well on the phone. You don't really need the iPad to play it. And you can pause it and come back to it. And I don't know, I had a lot of fun with it. I'll admit I'm a little burnt out on it at this point. I played it, pretty much nonstop in between, whether on the bus or just waiting for somebody in a meeting or on a call, on hold, or whatever it was. All those little gaps in the day for a couple months, and burned out a little bit on it. But it's still one I come back to every now and then, just because I've yet to get that perfect game as a solo player. So I'm going to keep doing it until I get it.
Yeah, this game, it's similar to mine, and that's just like this small card game that so mine's Red 7. Again, small card game, you can kind of get a bunch of plays in it. You're done in 10 minutes, and you could just kind of, whip it out again and again and again. So for those of you who don't know Red 7, it is Uno for smart people, quote unquote. I think that's kind of an unofficial tagline for it. You start with a hand of 7 cards and then a card in your tableau, and the cards are 1 to 7, and the colors of the rainbow, RGBIV. And there's a ranking system, so it goes, lowest to highest, and depending on who has the highest card, you're the winner. So you play a card from your hand, and that card is either better, or you have to play another card from your hand, so it changes the victory condition. So highest card wins. You don't have a highest card. All right, change the victory condition to most of a color. Most cards under 4, blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of go back and forth till one player resigns. Unlike the game, which the game kind of it's not an AI thing. It's just kind of playing numbers, making them match up. There is an AI in Red 7. You play against an opponent. It's actually pretty good. Maybe I'm just crappy at games, but the advanced AI beats me a lot. So it's like Anthony was saying, it kind of inspires you to kind of go at it again and again, get better. It's very stylish. The paintbrush look of it looks pretty good. They didn't have to go that extra route. I think Anthony and I kind of agree that these little card games is like just candy. Just put them in, play them over and over again. And my candy of choice is obviously Red 7.
The guys actually sent me a code for this, and I played through it a little bit and just didn't get quite hooked in it, but I liked it a lot. And I think part of it's just it's not a game I'd played the analog of in the past, so haven't really dove into it as much, but I really liked how it was implemented. And like you said, it looks really good for what it is. So then the second game I wanted to talk about is a little bit heavier. This is ironically not my favorite game of the same style of game from the same designer, but I like the app a little bit better, and that's the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. Same designer, same basic idea as Suburbia with a few tweaks, but the app, in my opinion, adds so much to this game. You've got this solo challenge, but it's almost like a campaign because you're going from castle to castle, and you have to beat different specific things that you need to do on each of these levels. You need to end with a certain number of points and have a certain number of a certain type of room and make sure the opponent has a certain number of X, Y, Z. They're always different. They're always difficult, and you're always going to play through each of them a handful of times before you beat it. So it's not like just knocking out Candy Crush levels. Each of these is legitimately hard, but, and I think this is important, not as hard as the Suburbia levels in the similar solo mode, which were brutal hard. I really like the Suburbia app as well, which came out the year before, but it was just a little too tough for me. So I kind of let it drop at a certain point. The Mad King app, I really liked, and it plays equally well if you're playing online against somebody as it does in the solo mode, but it has a lot going for it. So again, I'm not going to run through the rules of Mad King Ludwig, but you're building a castle and you're buying different pieces to do so, and there's a lot of rules in where you place them and how you place them. So there's a lot of cool things that the app can do in terms of what tiles are available, how much space you have available, how much money you have available to purchase with, all those things, and they all come into play here, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like Bad King a little bit better than Suburbia. I like the app a lot better than Suburbia. I really this one hit my screen a fair amount. So I definitely agree with you there. So my game is Pathfinder Adventure card game. So this game hit with a lot of fanfare. People were really looking forward to it. I think people had this intuitive sense that, wow, this would make a really great app, and it really does. I think it does what I think makes it work as an app. Actually, let me describe the game first. So, this game we talked a couple episodes ago about Arkham Horror, this card-driven game where you play a character and you're rolling through a deck of cards or multiple decks of cards. So think that, only instead of you're solving a mystery, here you're just kind of, getting treasure, beating bad guys. It's a real kind of delve type situation. So you're every location is a deck, and then you just go through each deck. So the inn has a deck, and the boathouse has a deck, and the woods have a deck, and all that kind of thing. You're looking for a big bad guy, so you either fight the big bad guy or a henchman. I'm not going to go into the whole how that works, but you're rolling dice, you're using your deck, as the game kind of goes on, you're improving your deck, and then you keep that deck over multiple adventures. What makes this work is that this game is not a complicated game at all, but it has a lot of overhead. There's a lot of stats. There's a lot of dice rolling. There's a lot of items. Are they in? Are they out? What gets burned? What gets trashed? So the bookkeeping becomes a lot, but the app takes care of everything. It takes all of that overhead and just puts it aside so that you can just enjoy the game. The port is faithful. I think there's about 5 of 6 adventures from the first adventure path, the Rise of the Rune Lords, available for the app right now. I think I've gone through 4 of those 5. I will not play the physical version of this. I refuse. I mean, compared to the digital version, just all of that bookkeeping is just swept out of the way, and I can just really sit there and enjoy this game, Pathfinder Adventure card game.
Yeah, this is another one where it's on my iPad. I played it a couple times. I really, really enjoyed it. Didn't have any past experience with it, but having played it a little, I know for a fact that, like you, I do not want to deal with all those cards. And it actually makes me want some of these other campaign-style card games to have digital versions, because one of the main reasons I don't dive into Lord of the Rings as much, or Warhammer Quest, which is no longer a thing, but great games, but I can't get into them as much because of all that upkeep and all the maintenance of all the cards. Apps are great. You can play these anywhere. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and so it kind of leads naturally into the broader discussion we wanted to have of apps versus board games. I just feel like apps are really just 2016 showed you that there's so much going on. We didn't even mention the board games that are adding apps into the gameplay experience. Mansions of Madness and Descent just came out with the app. Imperial Assault's coming out next year. That's Fantasy Flight, but I have a feeling like other companies are going to follow suit fairly soon. They're really kind of taking over, and the whole thing with Pathfinder and some of these other games kind of tell you why. I mean, it takes so much of the overhead out of the games. You can just kind of get to the gameplay. It's quick. You can play 30 games in the time that you takes to set up a couple of games of the board game app. It's cheaper. I mean, a lot cheaper. I mean, I think I didn't spend much on Pathfinder card game at all relative to the $100+ I could have spent on the same content. I mean, there's so much going for apps. Anthony, I'm sure like you have some experience with that.
It's amazing. kind of the difference in what you can get here. And I think Pathfinder Adventure card game is probably the best example out there right now, because it can be played solo and because it has those campaign modules. But there's other ones. I mean, there's other games that I feel like I've gotten a lot out of, even though I didn't own them. Back in the day, the Ascension app.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The ability to go in on it for like $10 or $15 and get access to, I think, the first 3 or 4 expansions at the time. I haven't played it in a little while, but you got a lot of content. Summoner Wars was great for like the first year that they supported it, and they stopped adding new stuff at a certain point, so it wasn't as great. But there's a lot of great stuff where even if you don't have the people to play it with, or even if you just can't afford to invest, the $100+ $200 it takes to buy a game and all of these expansions, there's an app, and the cost is relatively accessible. Now, the interesting thing I find about the app craze is that most of the games that have been converted to apps are not those big systems. You have, a lot of Euros, a lot of card games, a lot of standalone games that don't have a ton of expansions tacked onto them, which is funny to me because it doesn't really lend itself quite as much to the in-app purchase model. I would think things like the LCGs or like the Pathfinder type, module style system would make a lot more sense for companies to try to put into an app. But maybe it's the fact that you're then selling the IP for less, or it cheapens the other experience. I'm not really sure what the logic is there, or what the financials look like. But it is a very interesting model to see like what's come out, how it's come out, and then which games I've chosen not to purchase because I have an app and I play that more often.
So, like, give me an example of a Euro. Because, I mean, obviously, I was thought of the Pathfinder and Ascension were like the 2 first ones where I am not going to buy the base game. I mean, can you think of a heavier game where that's your experience of it and you probably wouldn't mind not having the physical?
I mean, that's tough. I don't know if there's any that I wouldn't buy. There's a couple that I haven't bought yet. Agricola, I still don't own a copy of that, but I do own like 4 of his other games. I'm not sure that's a fair comparison. Eclipse is one that I've played the app a decent amount and enjoyed. I still don't own that because of cost. It's very expensive. And they're now adding the new expansions into it again, which is, again, makes just cheaper to access a great game without having to pay a fortune for all the stuff that comes with it. Lords of Waterdeep, I do own that, but I think I've played it online way more than I've played it analog, just because you bring it out and it's more of an entry level game, so people aren't as interested. So I don't know that any of them really replace or push back analog versions, but they certainly are appealing to kind of get into it.
Right. Okay, so that's all the pros of the app experience. I mean, I'm pretty sure we could come up with a couple of others that people can think of. But we want to keep this to a manageable time frame. So I think we hit the main points of why apps. But I think if you kind of ask board gamers, there's this inherent kind of pushback, and it depends on where you are. The pushback might be vehement or not vehement or whatever it is. Like with, I think XCOM was one of the first games in 2014. It's like, this app, what is this doing? And more and more that kind of encroachment is happening. And I feel like board gamers are instinctively kind of resisting it. And I've done a little research on why. Not necessarily in the board game realm, but I think I let people know in a previous cast that I'm a therapist, and I'm interested in kind of questions of the brain and how the brain functions and interacts with things. So what I've kind of come up with is that it's a pretty simple point that apps deliver a better quantity of experience, but the physical board game tends to deliver a better quality of experience. And I have a couple of angles on that. So the first is about research into how people read. So like paper reading versus a Kindle or any kind of tablet. So for paper reading, our brains aren't just hopping from word to word. I think sometimes we think that it's the same thing. The tablet looks like a page, but it really isn't. When we read, we're making a map of what we're reading, like building a trail. It's most apparent when we have a reason to go back in a text. If we go back in a paper text, we remember a location as much as content. So we say, all right, I need that. Where'd that quote come from? Oh, yeah, I remember. It was next to this thought on the bottom right-hand corner of the page. So, like, you can just flip back and it's instant. And there's the quote, and you kind of, everything learning is starting to seep in. You can't really do that in a reader. You have to swipe back and you're pressing a bunch of buttons, and it's not very intuitive. So that sounds like an abstract kind of point, but the take home of that is that we learn better when we have that physical kind of experience of it. People get to know stuff they read better. In fact, some studies show that kids score better on open book tests when they have access to a paper text. Like imagine, getting 5 points better on a test because you could flip through a page as opposed to having it on a PDF. So on a board game, it's similar. I kind of baited Anthony by asking him if he preferred a Euro. That's one where the physical version of the board game you actually learn it better and you interact with it better if it's in your hands and if it's on the table. So when you have the components, you're making moves, your brain is actually rebuilding whatever engine the designer had in mind when they designed the game, and which makes for a click. That moment where it's like, aha, I know where this is. I know what to do. I know what the strategies are. Now I just have to figure out the strategies. That happens easier on a physical version because that's just the way our brains are wired. In a luck-based game, in a light game like Pathfinder or Red 7 or The Game or some of these other games, that you don't need that. It's just, boom, you're good. So you can just have an app version of it. But in a deeper strategy game, you're more likely to grok the game in physical form or just, understand it in a deeper, clearer way. So that, I didn't really think about that until I dove in and did some of the research, but it's like, yeah, I do learn games better when I can feel the components and I'm interacting in a table. Have you had that experience?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, just listening to you now, I'm thinking of Le Havre, which is a game I had not played in physical version at all, but I'd played the app a handful of times and liked it. And someone brought it out to the table, this is a few months ago, and was like, oh, who wants to play Le Havre? And most people are like, 3-hour Euro. I'm not really into that right now. But I was like, yeah, I love that game. And I got destroyed. I got absolutely obliterated in that game. And I thought I knew how to play. But my brain had just apparently not fully wrapped itself around the game because the app, this particular app especially, gives you so many cues, shows you where to touch, shows you which pieces of information you need to be looking at, when you need to be looking at them, which I think a lot of Euro apps do because they have to. There's so much information to convey at any point in time. Unlike like a card game where it's like two pieces of information, maybe like what's in your hand and what's on the table. So that lack of guidance from any kind of interface, including the other players, made it so I was basically learning the game for the first time. And I've had that experience with several others too. I've realized that if I learn a game in the app, I don't really know it for the table as well. I certainly can't teach it. I don't know the rules very well. And vice versa. Like if I go from a Euro into the app, I almost have to go through the tutorial again because the interface is usually designed to guide people from step to step. And it's just not how I think about the game. Everybody thinks about it in a different way. And the app is going to do it in its own way based on the developers. So absolutely. Yeah, I think it's such a different experience.
Yeah, and the differences are, way the article put it was great. It's like, let's say you're in Google Maps, you're running the app, and you're punching in like little different locations, and you're trying to get from A to B. Digital learning is just that process of going from A to B, while paper learning is more like zooming out and looking at the whole picture, and then zooming back in, zooming back out, zooming back in, so that you're building the broad kind of picture, and then you're filling in little details within the picture in a way where digital is less likely to do that. Obviously, we're not talking about like either or. I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking about either or. You can kind of get that learning, but it's harder. Part of the reason it's harder is because it actually takes a lot more energy for the brain to read a tablet. It's less energy intensive to read a book. So you have more mental processing energy to just, really get into and learn the whole engine as opposed to just kind of muddling through piece by piece. So I think that board games kind of have that to speak for it. There's another angle that can also kind of get that explain why there's that resistance to the app encroachment. This has to do with desire and pleasure. So this research comes from advertising. The previous was more education based. This is advertising, specifically digital versus paper ads. We hate junk mail, but the fact is that it's more effective than just splashes on a screen. So we're gonna keep getting junk mail. Sorry, people. Um, really, there's a whole bunch to it, but the thing about the paper ad is that it seems to awaken a part of the brain called the ventral striatum. There you go. That has to do with pleasure and valuation. We simply like things that we touch better than what we see or is flashed to us. It awakens that kind of drive to just love something. We're more likely to desire and like a game that we can touch. The board game experience is better, has a better chance to feel pleasing to us when we can touch it. So what does that mean? It means, A, that we're more likely to buy a game, which is pretty important for advertisers when their physical copy's there. And also that we're just more likely to love a game. And we're more likely to just say, you know what, I have to own the physical version. So games that I rate an 8 and above on BGG, I have to own. I just have to. I don't settle for the app on that unless it's like $1 million. Which I can't even think of games that are that expensive that I won't own them. I just do, and it's that kind of pleasure that I get from that feeling a board game. That's why components are so important. That's why Mechs and Minions did so well. It's a good game, but God, feel that I was giddy touching the components and the card quality and all that kind of stuff. And app will never give me that, no matter how gorgeous the app is. So there's that depth of learning, and there's also just a deeper sense of pleasure when it comes to handling a physical game.
Yeah, and that's definitely the truth. I mean, of all these apps that came out last year, the ones that I love the most are ones that I also own physical copies of and enjoy playing with other people. And I think, whether it's going back to the time when I did have a Kindle tablet and I no longer use it. I think the battery died at some point. I just never recharged it. Now I buy regular books again just because I like holding a book. Or it's downloading a bunch of PDFs of rule books onto my tablet and then never looking at them because I'd prefer to hold the rule book and be able to flip through it and reference the rules. The digital stuff just never quite replaces it. And I spend 10 hours a day at a computer, so it's not like I'm not a digital native. I do everything online, but when it comes to learning things and engaging and interacting with things and having fun, I'd really rather hold it. And I totally get that. It's more fun. You just feel it. You never really feel it in a game. And it's unfortunate just because, accessibility wise, but, it's cool to be able to go to the store and pick something up and then look at the pieces and appreciate the differences in those pieces because how much extra time goes into building something like Mechs versus Minions versus, let's say, an app of Mech versus Minions versus an app of, some dry Euro. Probably the same amount of time. The models maybe took a little longer, but you don't really appreciate that intellectually. You really do when it's physical.
I read this interesting thing by Rob Davio. He did a presentation that made him think of why legacy, right? Why is it important to tear pieces? Why is it important to change the board? And he was saying how one of the most exciting, if not the most, purely kind of biologically exciting events for a gamer is opening the box. Not even playing the game, not blowing the rules, just opening that box, taking out the shrink wrap, fighting the little air pocket when the box gets stuck. And just figuring out what's in the box is so purely exciting for a gamer. That's what led him to Legacy, because what is Legacy? Legacy is just opening box after box after box after box and then interacting physically with pieces. He could have made a campaign mode. He could have, that Pandemic Legacy could have been saran wrap on top of the regular Pandemic board, and it would have done the same thing. But it had to be that separate box experience because we just love to touch things. And I guess the research is saying that's not just particular. I don't think it's a case of everybody kind of does things different. I think that like we're hardwired as human beings to react in this way. We're hardwired to learn better with physical stuff. We're hardwired to learn better or to feel pleasure at physical stuff. I think there's always exceptions to the rule. I'm sure whoever interacts with this podcast says, hey, look, I love my digital games and scoreboard games. I'm just talking about tendencies. I'm just talking about human tendencies based upon research and stuff that I've looked at. But I think, like, the more I talk to gamers, just, in my game store or interact with gamers on Facebook, I really feel like, I feel like apps are here to stay and there's plenty of good stuff, but I feel like there's enough going for the quote unquote analog games where that's here to stay too. Let's enjoy both and let's find that equilibrium spot where we can make room in our gaming lives for both,
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say a lot of people are similar in that they spend a significant chunk of their day plugged into something. So being able to get home, unplug, and do something tactile, if gaming's your hobby, that's exactly what you want to do. I think that's huge. So I don't see it going away. I don't think it's a trend either. I don't think it's like some kind of nostalgia or some hot thing like some people have said we're in this bubble. I think it's here to stay just because our world is digital, so there is very much a place for these tactile analog things to fulfill that need that we have.
So, I mean, I think like if we wanted to kind of wrap a bow, at least on my thinking, apps are great for quantity and for the breadth, and as in the kind of the wideness, the accessibility, and bringing people in who normally wouldn't play these games, the cost, all that stuff. Like just that wide appeal to get as many gamers and as many games as possible. But if you want depth, if you want deeper learning, if you want deeper sense of enjoyment, then that's where the board game part of it is. So it's almost like, if you can think of like a horizon line and then a line kind of going up and down, it just kind of, they both kind of fill that need. And that's great. It's almost like gaming didn't know what it was missing until this digital component came in. And there was always like video games. But now that it's so close to our world, the board game world now, I think everyone benefits.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic supplement. So, so I mean, that's kind of what we wanted to talk about. I think the digital, as you say, Jason, the digital rush of board games is not a fad. It's here to stay. Especially, like, people wouldn't be making these apps if they weren't making money. If we're going to be strictly technical here, they're going to keep making them because people are buying them, and it's enjoyable. It's fun to be able to play your favorite game on the go, whether you're playing by yourself through these challenge modes or against somebody half a world away, and you don't have access to the game, or maybe your local game group's not meeting as often, or you can't get a certain game to the table. Whatever the reason is, they're out there. But it's certainly worth thinking about the value of the tactile, physical game in front of you, which I'm 100% with everything you read, all your research. I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. I did.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any points of disagreement, then, hit me with it. This is just a survey that I've done. If you have any different thoughts, then, chime in.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear what people think out there. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode then. And obviously there's a lot of things to be said about digital games, about analog games, about how they interact with each other. We didn't even really touch very much on kind of the crossover points in games like XCOM or Alchemist or some of the other ones coming out soon.
That's another episode, my man.
Yeah, we'll definitely dig into that. I think when Imperial Assault app comes out, I'm going to want to talk about that because I don't own Descent, but that's one where I have all the stuff and I'm going to be playing through it. But yeah, if you have thoughts on any of that, even the stuff we didn't talk about, hit us up. We are on all the things. We're on Facebook. I post there every day. Twitter, I post there multiple times a day. Board Game Geek. We have a guild there, 1735. You can find all the Board Gamers Anonymous stuff, but you will also find Table for One posts, which I will be doing my darndest to update every week as we post everything there. And then, of course, you can hit me up through the BoardGamersAnonymous.com website. Anthony at BoardGamersAnonymous.com, or you can fill out the contact form and just let us know what you think. I also post all these episodes on there, so you can leave a comment on any of them, and we will definitely get back to you. We are happy to take topics. We're happy to take suggestions. We will read your comments on the air. We do post every week, so if you send us a comment, we will probably get it before we record the next episode, unless you're listening to something old. So shoot it over. We will take a read, and we will share it with everybody, and probably have a nice conversation about it. So that is everything for this week's episode. And until next time, we'll save you a seat at this table for one.
Later, everybody.